8 months pregnant, I walked into the grand banquet hall, my heart full of hope and excitement. The chandeliers sparkled above, and the room buzzed with chatter and laughter. I had imagined this night for weeks, a celebration of Jason's big promotion, an evening where we would stand together, proud and happy. I wore my favorite dress, one that hugged my belly gently and made me feel beautiful despite the exhaustion of pregnancy. I held my head high, expecting smiles and congratulations, but what I got instead was something I could never have prepared for. Jason appeared beside me, looking every bit the charming man everyone thought he was. For a moment, I felt safe, imagining him smiling at me, introducing me to his colleagues, showing pride in his wife. But the moment passed in an instant. He turned to the crowd, a smirk on his face, and started mocking me. He told everyone I was overreacting, that my pregnancy made me clumsy, that I embarrassed him. The words hit me like knives, cutting through the excitement and replacing it with shock and disbelief. I froze, my hands clutching my dress, unable to speak. My face burned, tears threatening to spill as I looked around and saw the shocked expressions of people I respected and loved. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and escape the humiliation. My friends and family exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure if they should intervene. The laughter and whispers around me felt like a storm I couldn't escape. I realized, in that moment, that the man I had trusted and loved so deeply didn't see me as his partner, not really. To him, I was just someone to look good beside him, someone to impress others, and nothing more. My heart ached as the realization sank in, the betrayal cutting deeper than I could have imagined. After what felt like an eternity, I quietly excused myself, my steps heavy, my body trembling. Outside, I took a deep breath, the cool night air brushing against my face as if to wash away the sting of what had just happened. I held my belly, feeling the tiny movements of the baby inside, and tried to calm my racing thoughts. This child deserved a mother who was strong, someone who could protect her and herself from people who didn't truly care. Even in my hurt, a small spark of determination began to grow. I knew I couldn't let Jason's actions define me or my future. The humiliation was sharp, but it also opened my eyes. I realized I had to find my strength, not just for myself but for the little life I carried. That night, I made a silent promise, I would not let anyone, not even him, take away my dignity or my peace. With every step I took away from that hall, I felt a mixture of sorrow and resolve. My heart was heavy, but beneath the hurt, a quiet courage was growing. I knew the road ahead would be hard, but I also knew I had to stand tall, for me and for the baby. And as I looked back at the banquet hall one last time, I whispered to myself, this is just the beginning. The moment Jason spoke those words, my stomach sank even deeper than the weight of my pregnancy. He didn't just make a small comment or a teasing joke, he singled me out, accusing me of embarrassing him in front of everyone. His tone was cold, almost proud, and I could feel the weight of every eye in the room turning toward me. I wanted to vanish, to crawl into a corner and disappear, but instead, I stood frozen, my hands shaking slightly as I tried to keep my composure. The faces around me reflected shock and discomfort. My closest friends widened their eyes, unsure whether to step in or stay silent. My parents exchanged glances, their lips pressed tightly together, the pride they had in their daughter replaced with concern and disbelief. I felt a sharp pang of humiliation as I realized that even among people who cared for me, I was suddenly on display, reduced to the target of my husband's cruel words. As Jason continued, I felt a strange mixture of anger and sorrow. His criticism wasn't just about the banquet or my appearance that night, it was a deeper dismissal of me, my choices, and even the life growing inside me. How could the man I trusted, who had promised to love and protect me, speak to me this way? I wanted to shout, to defend myself, to make him see how wrong he was, but the room was silent except for his voice. I realized that any words I could muster would probably be twisted against me. In that moment, a wave of doubt washed over me. Did I ever really know him? Was this arrogance something he had hidden until now, or had I simply ignored the signs? I remembered little moments from the past few months, the subtle dismissals of my concerns, the impatient sighs when I mentioned plans or hopes, the way he had sometimes spoken over me as if my voice didn't matter. Each memory now hit me like a puzzle piece falling into place, showing a side of Jason I had refused to see. The banquet continued around me, but I felt detached from it, like I was observing from the outside. Conversations went on, laughter echoed, but none of it touched me. All I could feel was the sting of betrayal, a sharp ache in my chest that made my baby kick nervously as if sensing my distress. I wondered how many times I had ignored small warnings, hoping he would change, hoping he was just stressed or tired. I realized that hope had blinded me to the truth. By the end of that evening, I felt emotionally drained but strangely awake. The humiliation had cracked something open inside me, not a weakness, but a recognition. I could no longer pretend everything was okay. The man I loved had shown his true self, and I had to face it. As I left the banquet hall with my head held as high as I could manage, I made a quiet promise to myself: I would not let this moment define me, but I would remember it. It was a turning point, a moment that forced me to see him clearly and to consider what I truly wanted for my life and my child. I walked into our apartment, the door closing behind me with a quiet click that felt heavier than usual. The silence hit me immediately, empty and cold, and for the first time that night, I allowed the tears to come. They fell freely, hot and heavy, as I sank onto the couch, my hands resting on my swollen belly. The banquet, the laughter, Jason's cruel words, they all swirled in my mind, leaving me feeling small, powerless, and deeply betrayed. As I sat there, my mind drifted back to the months leading up to this moment. I remembered the late nights when Jason claimed he was working but would shut his phone the moment I entered the room. I remembered the dismissive tone he used when I tried to share my excitement or worries about the baby. There were small arguments, little jabs I had shrugged off as stress or temporary irritability. I had always believed in him, in us, and in the love I thought we shared. But now, each of those moments felt like warning signs I had ignored, each a small crack in a foundation I thought was solid. My phone buzzed, and I saw it was my mom, Margaret. Without hesitation, I answered, my voice breaking before I could even form words. She immediately understood. "Emily, sweetheart, I can hear it in your voice. What happened?" I couldn't stop the sobs as I recounted the banquet, Jason's humiliation, and the shock of seeing him expose such cruelty in front of everyone. Margaret's voice was firm but gentle. "Honey, I'm so sorry he treated you this way. No one deserves that, not you, not that baby. You have to think about your little girl now, her safety, her future, and your own peace. Don't let his selfishness control your life." Her words, though comforting, also made me confront reality. Jason wasn't just thoughtless, he had revealed a side of himself I could no longer ignore. I leaned back, trying to let my mom's advice sink in. I thought about the future, not the banquet, not the humiliation, but the tiny life growing inside me. Sophie deserved a mother who could stand strong, a life free from the shadow of someone who didn't truly respect her mother. The tears slowed as I realized that while my heart ached, it also held a seed of determination. I had to protect both of us. Margaret stayed on the line, offering guidance, encouragement, and love. She reminded me that strength often comes from pain and that sometimes, the hardest moments force us to see clearly. As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of sadness and resolve. Jason's betrayal had shaken me, but it hadn't broken me. The banquet had been a public humiliation, but at home, in my quiet apartment, I began to reclaim my sense of self. I knew that moving forward wouldn't be easy, but for my baby and for myself, I had to find the courage to do what was right, to think clearly, and to prepare for the steps I would take next. After that night, I knew I couldn't stay the same. The humiliation Jason had caused wasn't something I could just forget or forgive easily. As I sat in our quiet apartment, feeling the baby kick gently, I realized I had a choice. I could let him continue to control me, or I could take back my life and protect my child. I chose the latter. I started making plans quietly, not letting Jason see even a hint of what I was thinking. He probably assumed I would crawl back, apologize, and beg for his forgiveness. He didn't know me as well as he thought. I had spent too many nights worrying about his feelings, too many days trying to keep the peace while he dismissed mine. This time, things would be different. I wouldn't let fear or shame dictate my actions. The first step was protecting myself and my unborn daughter. I reached out to a lawyer, Karen Lewis, someone my mom had recommended. Karen was kind but firm, someone who understood the challenges I was facing. During our meeting, I explained everything, the banquet, the humiliation, and the patterns I had noticed over the months. Karen listened carefully, asking questions, taking notes, and outlining the ways I could legally secure my rights and my child's future. Sitting in that office, I felt a strange mix of relief and strength. Relief because I was finally doing something concrete to safeguard us, and strength because for the first time, I felt in control of the situation. I wasn't relying on Jason's goodwill or waiting for him to change. I was taking action. Back at home, I started organizing my life differently. I made lists of what I needed to do before the baby arrived, from financial arrangements to arranging support from family and trusted friends. Every small decision reminded me that I wasn't powerless. I had been hurt, yes, but I wasn't broken. Meanwhile, Jason continued living under the assumption that I would beg for reconciliation. He sent small messages, tried to make casual comments, all designed to test if I would fold. I ignored them. I focused instead on preparing for the day I could stand on my own, without needing his approval or attention. Each step I took, no matter how small, strengthened my resolve. By the end of the week, I felt a new kind of determination. Walking away wasn't just an idea, it was becoming a plan. I could see a future where my daughter and I were safe, independent, and respected. Jason's arrogance had blinded him to my growing independence, and that would be his mistake. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I knew I was ready to face it head-on. For the first time, I realized that the power to protect and reclaim my life was entirely in my hands. A few days after deciding to take control, I started looking more closely at Jason's actions, trying to understand just how far his betrayal went. I began checking details he had always dismissed, bills, bank statements, and small financial papers I had never paid much attention to. That's when I discovered the truth, and my heart sank. Jason had been hiding a massive debt for months, money he never mentioned, and worse, it was clear he had planned to cut me out of any inheritance or financial security I should have had. Everything I had believed about our life together was crumbling in an instant. As I dug deeper, the betrayal only grew. I realized he hadn't just been dishonest with me, he had been manipulating our family and friends too. He had spun stories, painted himself as the wronged husband, and made subtle comments to make others doubt my character. People who I had trusted implicitly were being influenced without my knowledge. The realization left me stunned. The man I thought I knew, the one I had loved and trusted with my life, had been playing a careful, calculated game behind my back. I felt a rush of emotions, hurt, anger, and disbelief, but slowly, that anger began to shift. It wasn't just fury at his actions, it became fuel. I realized that if I let this destruction stop me, I was giving him exactly what he wanted, control. I couldn't allow that, not for myself and not for the baby. I had to turn this betrayal into a source of strength, to make sure Jason could never hurt me or Sophie in the same way again. I began planning carefully. Every piece of information I had uncovered became a tool. The debt, the hidden accounts, his lies to family, they were not just proof of his dishonesty, they were the key to reclaiming my life and my dignity. I thought about how I could use this knowledge strategically, how to protect myself legally and emotionally while exposing the truth if necessary. Each time I considered his manipulation of others, my determination grew stronger. I wouldn't just survive, I would make sure justice, in some form, was served. Sitting in the quiet of our apartment, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't had before. Jason had underestimated me, assuming I would crumble under humiliation or betrayal. But he didn't realize that the more he tried to control me, the stronger my resolve became. Every secret I uncovered, every lie I exposed in my mind, made me more prepared to stand tall, not just for myself, but for my daughter. By the end of that day, I had made a silent promise. I would not allow Jason to have power over me or Sophie. His deception had hurt me deeply, but it had also awakened something fierce inside me. My anger had transformed into determination, and I knew I would use it to take back control of my life, protect my child, and ensure that Jason would never have the chance to humiliate or manipulate us again. I knew I couldn't face Jason alone. His lies were deep, and his influence over family and friends made it clear that if I tried to act by myself, I would only be ignored or dismissed. That's when I thought of David, a trusted family friend and lawyer who had always been fair and careful in his advice. I reached out to him quietly, explaining the situation without letting Jason know anything. David listened, his expression serious, and promised to help me navigate the next steps while keeping everything confidential. With David's guidance, I began gathering evidence that could expose Jason's deceit. I went through bank statements, emails, and contracts, carefully documenting every hidden debt, every manipulation, and every lie he had told to make me appear at fault. Each piece of evidence built a clearer picture of his true character, and with every discovery, my confidence grew. I realized that the humiliation and betrayal I had suffered could now become my strength, a way to protect myself and Sophie while holding Jason accountable. We also began talking to witnesses, people who had seen Jason's behavior firsthand or had been subtly affected by his manipulation. Friends who had been unsure or hesitant to speak now shared what they had noticed over the months. Their testimonies confirmed patterns I had already suspected, and together, these accounts formed a strong foundation for any action I might take. I made sure every step I took was calculated. Jason had no idea what I was doing. He assumed I was still the same frightened, humiliated woman who would beg for forgiveness, who would quietly accept whatever humiliation he handed me next. That assumption worked in my favor. I moved carefully, meeting David in private, securing copies of documents, and organizing the evidence in a way that would leave no room for doubt. Every detail mattered, from small financial transactions to casual comments he had made in front of others. Even as I worked, I kept up the appearance of normalcy at home. I spoke politely to Jason, nodded when he tried to engage me in conversation, and let him believe that he still had control. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, I was preparing the strategy that would eventually put me and my daughter out of his reach. Each day, the plan became clearer, and my fear began to be replaced with purpose. By the end of the week, I felt a quiet strength that I had never known before. Jason remained oblivious, thinking he had the upper hand, while I had already taken steps that would ensure he could never manipulate me again. I had allies, evidence, and a clear plan, and for the first time since the banquet, I felt a sense of control over my life. The humiliation I had suffered was still painful, but now it was fueling a carefully constructed path to justice, protection, and eventual freedom. The day Sophie was born was the hardest and most beautiful day of my life. Labor was long and exhausting, and every contraction tested my body and my mind. But I kept thinking of her, the tiny life I had been carrying for months, and it gave me the strength to push through. Hours later, when the nurses placed her in my arms for the first time, I felt a rush of love so intense it almost took my breath away. She was perfect, her tiny fingers curled around mine, her eyes blinking as if taking in the world. In that moment, I realized that this little girl was my strength, my reason to keep fighting and to never let anyone diminish me again. Jason arrived at the hospital later that day, but I was ready. He tried to act casual, as if he had every right to be there, as if he could still control me with his presence. He approached with a forced smile, speaking to the nurses and trying to take charge of the situation, but I didn't flinch. I had prepared for this moment in every way possible. My family was there, holding my hand, guiding me, and making it clear that Jason's attempts to assert dominance would not work. David had also been in touch, quietly ensuring that the hospital staff knew the boundaries Jason had no right to cross. Seeing him realize he had no power over me was strangely satisfying. He had assumed that my pregnancy and exhaustion would make me vulnerable, that the birth of our child would make me dependent on him again. But he was wrong. I was the one in control. Every look of frustration on his face reminded me of the long hours I had spent preparing, the courage I had built, and the determination that had grown from the humiliation he once caused. Holding Sophie in my arms, I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't known I could feel. I had survived everything he threw at me, and now I had something he could never take away, my daughter and my independence. For the first time, I truly understood how strong I was. The fear, the humiliation, and the heartbreak had all been painful, but they had also shaped me into someone who could stand tall no matter what challenges came next. As I looked at Sophie, I made a silent promise to her and to myself. I would protect her, guide her, and ensure that she grew up knowing the value of strength and self-respect. Jason could no longer threaten that. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and I finally felt what it meant to be free in both spirit and action. Holding my daughter, I smiled through the exhaustion and tears, realizing that this birth wasn't just the start of Sophie's life, it was the beginning of my own true freedom and confidence. A few weeks after Sophie's birth, I knew it was time to act. I had gathered every piece of evidence of Jason's deceit, financial documents, hidden debts, and proof of how he had manipulated people to his advantage. With David's guidance, I prepared to present it to the people who mattered most, his family and his business partners. This was the moment I had been working toward quietly, the moment where the truth would finally come out. I started with his family. I met them privately, showing them the documents and calmly explaining everything Jason had been hiding. At first, there was shock. Faces that had once trusted him now held confusion and disbelief. I spoke clearly, without anger, letting the evidence speak for itself. Slowly, their expressions shifted from disbelief to concern, and I could see the realization forming: Jason had lied and manipulated them all along. Next, I contacted his business partners. The meeting was tense, but I stayed composed, presenting the facts in a straightforward way. I showed them his hidden debts, the contracts he had altered, and the steps he had taken to hide his financial mistakes while making it seem like he was successful. The reaction was immediate. Partners who had once respected him began questioning his decisions, doubting his credibility, and re-evaluating their trust in him. Every nod of agreement and serious glance toward me made it clear that Jason's carefully constructed image was crumbling. Meanwhile, Jason remained unaware of what was happening. He still assumed he had control, that he could maintain his reputation despite everything. But as I watched the reactions of the people he had relied on, I could see the beginnings of panic forming in his eyes. He realized, slowly and painfully, that the tables had turned. The humiliation he had so casually inflicted on me at the banquet was now reflecting back on him. He was powerless to stop the wave of doubt and disappointment he had created. It was a strange feeling, witnessing his downfall. I had never wanted revenge for the sake of cruelty, I wanted justice and protection for myself and Sophie. But seeing him confronted with the consequences of his own actions brought a sense of satisfaction and relief. The man who had belittled me publicly was now facing embarrassment in the very circles he had tried to impress. By the end of the week, the shift was undeniable. Jason's influence was weakening, and his arrogance had backfired. He had built his world around control and appearances, and now, because of his own dishonesty, that world was cracking. I felt a quiet confidence knowing that I had acted wisely and carefully, without rash emotion, and that Sophie and I were finally secure. Jason's realization of his downfall was clear: he could no longer manipulate anyone, and the power he once held over me was gone. The banquet humiliation, which had once left me feeling small and powerless, now felt like the moment that had pushed me to uncover the truth and reclaim my life. For the first time, I truly understood that strength and justice could come quietly, methodically, and without compromise. A week after the banquet, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I saw Jason standing there, his posture different, his confident smirk replaced with something I had never seen before: desperation. His eyes searched mine, pleading, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the man I had once loved. But I quickly reminded myself that the person I was facing now was not that man. This was someone broken, humiliated, and powerless, the same way I had felt at the banquet. He stumbled over his words, begging for forgiveness, trying to explain, to charm, to manipulate me back into submission. He spoke about mistakes, about how he didn't mean to hurt me, about how everything would be different if I just gave him another chance. but I had nothing left to give. I had spent weeks preparing for this confrontation in my mind, and I had built a new sense of strength that he could no longer shake. I remained calm, my voice steady as I responded. I told him that his apologies, his excuses, and his desperate pleas did not change what had happened. I reminded him that his actions had consequences, and that I would no longer allow him to control me or dictate my life. There was no anger in my tone, only clarity and resolve. This was not a moment for shouting or drama, it was a moment to show him that I had grown stronger than his manipulations. I made it clear that I was independent now, that I had plans for my life and for Sophie's life that did not include him. I told him I had the support I needed, the security I had earned, and that he could no longer interfere in our lives. Every word was deliberate, a boundary being set, a statement that the power he had once held over me was gone forever. Jason's face fell as he realized the truth of my words. The desperation remained, but there was no leverage, no manipulation left that could sway me. I was unyielding. The humiliation he had caused me at the banquet had ignited a fire inside me, and now I stood firm, not as a victim, but as a woman who had reclaimed her life. As he turned to leave, I watched silently. I felt no hatred, only a quiet satisfaction. The tables had turned completely. He could beg, plead, and apologize, but it would make no difference. Sophie and I were safe, independent, and respected. For the first time, I fully understood the power of setting boundaries and standing firm. Closing the door behind him, I held Sophie close and breathed deeply. I had faced the man who had humiliated me, and I had done so without fear, without compromise. That day, I realized that my strength was not just about surviving humiliation or betrayal, it was about taking control of my life, protecting my child, and never allowing anyone to manipulate or diminish me again. It was the final proof that I had reclaimed my freedom and my power. Life after Jason's departure felt like waking up for the first time in years. Sophie and I settled into a routine that was peaceful and steady. Every morning, I watched her tiny hands stretch and yawn, feeling a sense of joy and responsibility that went beyond anything I had experienced before. I focused on building a life that was truly ours, free from fear, humiliation, or manipulation. Slowly but surely, I reclaimed my independence, both emotionally and financially, making decisions for us that were guided only by what was right, not by anyone else's expectations. I worked hard to secure our finances, carefully planning for the future. I used the knowledge and support I had gathered during the months of preparation to ensure that Sophie and I would never be at risk again. Every paycheck, every small decision, and every step toward security reminded me that I was capable of standing on my own. I didn't need Jason or anyone else to define my worth or our stability. The sense of freedom was exhilarating, and it came from knowing I had taken control of my life entirely. Meanwhile, Jason attempted to reach out several times, each attempt more desperate than the last. He sent messages, tried to visit, and even sought to explain his actions, but none of it mattered. I had changed. His words held no power over me. I listened politely once, long enough to confirm he had nothing of substance to offer, and then I moved on. The man who had once humiliated me now faced the full consequences of his deceit. He had lost my trust, respect, and place in our lives forever. As the months passed, I noticed a transformation in myself. I was calmer, stronger, and more confident. The fear and shame that had once consumed me had been replaced by resilience and clarity. I no longer worried about what Jason might do or say because I knew I had done everything necessary to protect myself and Sophie. Every challenge I had faced, the banquet, the betrayal, the manipulation, had shaped me into someone who could face life on her own terms. Reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized my story was no longer one of humiliation or heartbreak. It had become a story of empowerment. I had turned betrayal into strength, fear into action, and humiliation into independence. I had learned the true meaning of self-respect, the kind that comes from standing firm in your values and protecting those you love. Holding Sophie close at night, I often thought about how far we had come. I knew that life would continue to have its challenges, but I was ready. I had the strength, the clarity, and the determination to face whatever came next. My journey had been painful, but it had also been transformative. I had not only survived Jason's betrayal, I had emerged stronger, wiser, and completely in control of my life. Sophie and I were safe, secure, and free, and that was the greatest victory of all.